the past few months, the world has been transformed as global events have forced a conversation on race, and the Black Lives Matter movement has been reborn. Change has been swift and really quite remarkable. The statue of slave trader Edward Colston was torn down by protesters in Bristol. When I saw that, it was almost like a Berlin Wall moment. It was emotional for me. It would appear we are re-evaluating our history. As well we should. Four years before the tumultuous events of this year, this statue to the pioneering black nurse Mary Seacole was erected right here, outside St. Thomas's Hospital in South London. She now stands here, keeping a watchful eye over our lawmakers across the river in the Houses of Parliament. In spite of much opposition, it took a dedicated team years of campaigning in order to have Mary celebrated in this way at all. One could argue that the fight to erect the Mary Seacole statue was a sign of things to come. In the film you're about to see, I was privileged to follow the creation of this statue from its very beginning and learn more about Mary's remarkable life. Watch this film to see why our statues and who we choose to commemorate is so important, and why Black British history is British history.
My name is David Harewood, and for all my life I've been fascinated by a Jamaican woman who did something quite extraordinary over 160 years ago.
In fact, she's about to have a statue erected in her honour opposite the Houses of Parliament in London, the first such statue to a named black woman anywhere in the UK. And she's long been a personal heroine of mine.
Mary Seacole was a businesswoman and doctress who paid her own way to the front line of the Crimean War in 1855 and helped wounded soldiers just off the battlefield.
I admire her heart, her compassion, and her drive.
She never took no for an answer. She was incredibly brave.
I think it would have been incredibly difficult to battle the disdain of white society and to do what she did.
She's often compared to Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp. But until now, only Florence has been honoured with a statue. Mary Seacole's memorial is going to go up here, opposite the Houses of Parliament in central London. For some, the statue is deeply controversial. They maintain her achievements have been blown up out of all proportion.
Myths have been invented about her saving thousands of lives on the battlefield, but this is complete nonsense. It's faking history at its worst.
Others think that though she was medically unqualified, the care she provided was of genuine benefit to the troops.
It was really a love-centered approach. You know, it was very personal. She was very hands-on. And actually, that was part of the healing process.
12 years in the planning, 18 months in the making. Now the enormous bronze statue is finally ready to be unveiled.
It's fantastic to be about to see her finally completed.
This is Small Heath in Birmingham, a place I knew well as a kid.
So I'm here in Small Heath Park, and back in the day, this used to be a boating lake, and we'd take our boats out, sail up to these islands, jump off and throw stones at passing boats, and the park keeper would come out and chase us, and we'd scamper across the field and up some entry and disappear into one of our friends' houses. For a naughty kid like me growing up here in the 70s, there were precious few black role models.
I remember this figure of Queen Victoria outside Birmingham Town Hall, and other royal statues.
But there were no figures from the past whose skin colour was like mine that I could look up to.
Things have moved on, but not enough for many. In London, there's the odd statue of a famous black man. But nowhere in Britain is there a statue of a famous black woman.
Well, all that's about to change, because in this garden, here, at St Thomas's Hospital, right opposite the Houses of Parliament, there is going to be a 3-metre-high bronze statue honouring the memory of Mary Seacole.
But who was Mary Seacole? And what exactly did she do? In 1853, the Crimean War broke out. Britain and her allies, France and the Ottoman Empire, were concerned that Russia was trying to expand south. Laying siege to Sevastopol, then as now the home of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, seemed key to holding Russia back. So troops were sent to Crimea in their thousands. At home in Jamaica, Mary Seacole read about the Crimean War. Then, at the age of 49, a widow, she crossed the Atlantic to London and tried to get herself recruited as a nurse. 5 times she failed.
In the National Archives, there's a notebook kept by interviewers of applicants to go out and join Florence Nightingale in the Crimea. And little comments are written by each candidate, and one of them seems to be perfectly well qualified. She's called Elizabeth Purcell, but she's noted as being almost black, and she doesn't get the job. So I think Mary's skin colour cannot have helped.
Mary Seacole then took a remarkable decision. She decided to make her own way to Crimea and set up a shop-cum-restaurant that she called the British Hotel.
She is such an incredibly modern woman in this Victorian age. There she is, travelling the world on her own, doing exactly what she wants to do. There aren't many women today who do things like that. It's extraordinary, and she did it.
She was genuinely compassionate because she travelled all those thousands of miles to nurse soldiers, and she was also very courageous.
Morning trains through Camden Cutting shape the crescent of the square.
Sculptor Martin Jennings is going to be making the memorial to Mary. And before meeting him for the first time, I went to St Pancras Station to see his figure of the poet John Betjeman.
That's really fantastic.
Martin Jennings' studio is in Oxfordshire, and it's here he's going to be making the Mary Seacole statue over the next 3 years.
Hello, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. How are you?
in.
Thank you, thank you.
He's already made a scale model called a maquette to show what it's going to look like. Eventually, the statue will be 3 meters tall.
So this is extraordinary. Absolutely love what you're doing with this maquette here. Can you just explain a little bit about it?
Well, first of all, I wanted to bring across her sheer dynamism. You know, she was someone who crossed the globe to care for these men in the way that she, you know, she saw this as her vocation. So you have this dynamic figure, but it needed to be more than just a figure on a plinth.
I understand that the sculpture is designed also to be seen at night.
Yes. It's going to be illuminated from in front so that her shadow falls onto the disc behind her. So there'll be something rather looming about this shadow, and it binds the components together.
That's fantastic.
And when you yourself step up onto the platform, your own shadow is thrown onto it. So for a moment,
I love that.
You occupy the same space as she occupied when she was in the Crimea all those years ago.
That's great. That's great.
The disc behind the statue is going to carry an imprint of the ground in Crimea, where Mary Seacole was based.
So we will take an exact impression of the surface of the ground there and cast it in bronze.
Wow.
It's an incredibly ambitious project, and I love Martin's idea. But if I was going to get to grips with understanding more about this remarkable woman, then there was one place I simply had to go: Jamaica. And while I'm there, Martin has asked me to do him a favor, to track down a bust of Mary Seacole that was modeled in her lifetime.
There she is. Wow. Strikes me immediately about this bust. She has incredibly compassionate features, particularly her eyes. So I can imagine
a soldier on the battlefield, feeling rather blessed that this lady is coming through the smoke and helping me feel better. Because the only pictures he has of her are all front on, Martin has asked me to photograph it from different angles.
Well, it's dated 1871, created by Count Gleichen. He was a lieutenant in the Royal Navy who actually knew Mary Seacole very well and had benefited from her care in the Crimea. He created a carving of her. Naturally, it's very fragile. It's made of clay, so it's, easily destroyed. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful piece of work. I mean, purely in financial terms, it's probably the most valuable piece in our collection. What we do know about Mary Seacole is that she always dressed very flamboyantly. She always dressed with colour, like a real, true Jamaican woman. Mm. So she brightened the lives of the people around her, especially soldiers who were often sick and dying. Florence Nightingale had problems with her because she said that she was dispensing liquor to the troops and stuff like that. But she cared for them in many ways. Yeah. She wasn't sort of a qualified nurse. She learned a lot of sort of Jamaican folk medicines from her mother, and she brought that to bear. But she brought all the other stuff too. She was providing excellent food, apparently. A French chef records, but she was providing excellent food. She provided champagne and things, luxuries, things that men want when they're in those kind of situations. Mm. It's that level of kind of holistic care that she brought to all her enterprises, which is probably what we love her for most of all.
Although slavery was still in existence when Mary was born in 1805, her mother was a free woman. She lived in the capital, Kingston, and kept a lodging house for British military officers. Mary was the illegitimate child of her mother's union with a Scottish soldier.
I'm just sitting here rereading some of the passages from Mary's autobiography.
My father was a soldier of an old Scotch family. I suppose as his mistress, Mary's mother must have received quite a lot of support in her business ambitions and probably a higher social standing.
But Mary's mother wasn't just a hotel keeper. She was also a doctress, a self-taught herbal healer. And what she'd learned about treating the sick, she passed on to her daughter. One of the criticisms of Mary is that far from being a nurse, she was just a quack.
Now, Mary called herself a doctress. I mean, she didn't have any sort of formal medical training. She had no medical degree. So what exactly did she mean? So I'm going to meet Dr. Diane Robertson, who used to be a pharmacist before putting all that aside in favor of herbal healing.
They had the name and the title, doctress, and they would have their bags carrying all of their medicaments.
So she would have had in her bag grasses and seeds and all different types of medicines that she...
Yes, and powders, which she would have brought with her from the Caribbean. Powders, grasses, seeds, all of that in powder form. Mm.
And do you think perhaps, going out there on the battlefield, do you think that would have thrown Mary at all? Or do you think she would have just literally just got straight to work and...
She just got straight to work because she knew what she was doing. Mm. She was intuitive. She knew what to do. Mm. And she didn't say that she was healing. She walked on the battlefield to give them comfort and love. Comfort and love. Mm. That's what she did.
Mary was a well-respected figure in Kingston. So much so, at the age of 31, an English merchant asked to marry her. She claimed that Edwin Seacole was the godson of none other than Admiral Lord Nelson.
We don't really know much about the marriage, except that it lasted less than a decade. Edwin was rather sickly, and Mary spent a great deal of her time nursing him.
He died 8 years after their wedding. Then her mother died too. Mary inherited her boarding house and did what she could to nurse British Army and Navy officers afflicted by tropical fevers.
When the Crimean War broke out in 1853, Mary's enthusiasm to get involved, which frankly seems rather strange to me, begins to make a little bit more sense when you realize that she grew up here in Jamaica, surrounded by British soldiers. Still, I don't think that would have been enough incentive for me to leave my
friends, my family, my loved ones, my whole world behind. Mary did, though. She traveled to that frozen, death-soaked landscape when she could have stayed right here in Jamaica, treating her beloved British servicemen. I'm not sure whether I would have made the same decision. But then again, Mary Seacole was made of much more sterner stuff than I. I'm following the story of a long-time heroine of mine, Mary Seacole. She was a businesswoman and doctoress who paid her own way to the front line of the Crimean War in 1855 and helped wounded soldiers coming off the battlefield. Now, sculptor Martin Jennings is making a bronze statue of her to go opposite the Houses of Parliament. It'll be the first statue of a famous black woman in Britain. It's been a year since I was last at Martin's studio, and he's about to start modeling the statue.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize she was so big.
This giant metal frame is known as an armature and acts as a skeleton for the sculpture.
She's fantastic.
Today, Martin is going to start laying on the clay for the very first time.
This isn't going to be built out of solid clay. It'll be 2 inches or so of clay on the surface. And I can move it around the room while I'm working on it. Step by step, you move it on. And bang it in a bit so it really clings to the mesh. It'll be a long time before it looks like the thing.
Right.
As you can see, there's a couple of inches of thickness you can get in on the clay.
So this whole process will take you how long?
It'll be a month's work to get the base clay on,
Right.
which is not the finished surface. I'm going to be clay modelling for several months. 4, 5, 6 months.
Wow.
Should we give David a go now?
Really? My God, I don't want to ruin anything. Oh,
Go on.
Go on.
Go on, there you go.
Marvellous.
You can make my statue for me.
Martin Jennings and David Harewood. Oh, here we go. That's heavier than I thought.
It's a bit of a workout.
It is. You're very strong. So I'm just going to stick this on.
Stick that on. That's it. Lay it on with the back of the trowel. I'll leave this bit exposed in the finished piece. Now you can get your signature on it. You're a natural. I can leave this to you.
It's such an honour.
Building up the clay is only one stage of this ambitious sculpture. The disc behind the statue that Martin showed me on his scale model will be cast from a computer scan of the terrain in Crimea, where Mary set up the British hotel. In the last year, Martin and 2 colleagues have been out in Crimea to find the actual spot.
She sailed in here. Yeah. It takes several weeks before she finds the site for what she called the British Hotel, a couple of miles outside Balaclava. So we're here. We've got the front up there. So she ends up a couple of miles up the road here. Mrs. Seacole is marked out just on that junction there.
When Martin finds the place, he and his colleagues will scan the ground with a 3D scanner. Back in the UK, the information will be used to create the bronze disc.
Should be up at the top up here.
Ukrainian farmer wondering what we're up to.
Well, I'm reading a 150-year-old map, but I think we're pretty much there.
2 local historians were waiting for Martin at the site.
One thing I didn't realise was that from here you can see straight down the Valley of Death.
Yes,
where the charge of the Light Brigade took place.
On the 25th of October, 1854, 600 horsemen of the Army's Light Brigade had been ordered to charge straight at the Russian guns. Their bravery was immortalized in the famous poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson.
Forward
Select the light brigade. Charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600.
The troops would come back from the front,
yes,
coming down the road that way, from the coal.
Yes.
And they would be longing to find
Yes.
Mary Seacole's hotel.
At the British Hotel, she sold food and alcohol, dispensed herbal remedies, and gave medical advice, all aimed at raising the morale of the troops.
Ring, pies, bread, butters, milk as well, and even prepared very good meat.
Evidence of her hospitality is still embedded in the ground.
That's extraordinary, to find these fragments from
Yes.
160 years ago. But I've just been reading again the autobiography
Yes.
and reading about how the soldiers would chop the top off the
Yes.
champagne bottles. This is incredible, not only to find the site, but to find all these relics.
Mrs. Seacole's was a great success. Her food and drink went down a storm with the officers. And she offered her remedies and advice free to soldiers who couldn't afford them. But she did something more remarkable still. She would come here to what was then known as Cathcart's Hill to watch the troops laying siege to Sevastopol. When the attacks died down, Mary Seacole would make her way towards the front line. In the words of William Russell, war correspondent for the Times, "I have seen her go down, under fire, with a little store of creature comforts for our wounded men, and a more tender or skillful hand about a wound or a broken limb could not be found among our best surgeons."
Most of us really feel the utter hollow sadness of a teenage soldier far from home and dying without his mum. And I think that really for someone like her to be there and hold someone's hand and comfort them is just something you can't quantify.
In a quarry just 200 yards from Mary Seacole's hotel, Martin found the texture of rock he was looking for.
At the moment, Rungway and Joe are taking a careful impression of the ground, scanning every inch of it, so that when we take the information back to the foundry, we can reproduce that exactly in a compressed foam form for reproduction in bronze. This is a slow process. Perfect, yep. There's something about taking this scrap of a faraway patch of land over which all this blood was spilt, taking it back and installing it in central London, which to me said something about empire and about governments making these decisions about faraway things.
The siege of Sevastopol ended in September 1855, with the Russians retreating to the far side of the harbour and sinking their own ships. By spring the following year, the war was over. Mary Seacole wrote movingly about soldiers she'd known who would never return home. I knew all the cemeteries where friends rested. I went many times, lingering long over many a mound that bore the names of those whom I had been familiar with in life, thinking of what they had been and what I had known of them.
Being kind was part of what Mary Seacole was. She couldn't help but be kind. And in this Victorian age of military stiffness and etiquette and rules and regulations, her kindness allowed her to break through all that and to reach people with an amazing immediacy.
In 1856, at the end of the war, Mary was left with a great deal of stock and many unpaid bills. Her debts tipped her into bankruptcy, but her deeds in Crimea had made her famous.
She was celebrated during her time. She was a celebrity. You know, when after the Crimean War and she came back and she was actually destitute because she'd invested all her own money to go there and to help the soldiers, it was the soldiers who organised an actual party for her to celebrate this extraordinary woman.
It was held here in Kennington, South London.
For 4 days solid, it was an absolute sellout. I can't think of any other black person in the 19th century in Britain who was celebrated in quite that way.
The concerts were a huge success, and it looked like Mary would finally make some money. But there was a problem.
Unfortunately, the scale of this party went a long way towards bankrupting the music hall.
Mary made next to nothing. Once again, her future was hanging in the balance. It's now been 4 months since Martin Jennings began work on the full-size clay model of Mary Seacole, from which the final bronze will be cast. I went back to see how he was getting on.
That is really, really impressive, Martin. Congratulations.
Thanks. I'll come down.
Yeah.
The body is more or less complete, but the head has yet to reach its final shape.
Are these the references you're going to be using when it comes to her head?
They are. I mean, there aren't many, and what's so interesting is that each one is quite different to the other. So the question is, which one do you choose, or which aspects do you choose of which ones? And this photograph of her seems to me to express the kind of strength of character. That's a face that has seen a lot and has a kind of wisdom and actually a kind of compassion to it, I think, at the same time as being strong and dynamic. And so that is my primary material there. But what that doesn't give me is an idea of how her face looked in profile. So for that, we have this extremely useful bust in Jamaica that you really kindly took pictures of for me.
Brilliant, actually.
They are actually remarkable. But what I can see from that is, for example, that it's a pretty straight line down her nose there. You can't tell that from those photographs. And the jaw, which is squarer in that image, softer and rounder here.
Now, I know you're about to start work on her features. What problems have you had to solve?
I wouldn't really say that it was a problem, but there has been, looking at the maquette, a number of people have said she doesn't look black enough, whatever that might mean. Now, looking at the photographs here, what you can see is that her face absolutely combines aspects of both her parents. She had a Scottish father and Afro-Caribbean mother. But there are certain features that, you know, for example, her mouth and lips look like they might have been more from her father. Her nose is maybe narrower than her mother's might have been. I mean, people have said, I need to make the nose wider, but I'm basing it on what I can see in the records that we have.
How black Mary would have looked is only one of a number of controversies provoked by the announcement that she's to be honoured with a statue at St. Thomas's Hospital. Many of Florence's admirers feel both women should be celebrated, though some maintain that Mary's achievements bear no comparison with Florence Nightingale's.
I personally think that in years to come, this beautifully crafted statue of Mary Seacole will come to be seen as a monument to the mad excesses of political correctness. She was basically in the Crimea as a businesswoman and an entrepreneur, earning money, coining it in, as one account says, and occasionally she did first aid on the side. Her achievements have been blown up out of all proportion. So it shows to me a wanton disregard for the history of nursing to put up a statue to somebody who wasn't a pioneer nurse, wasn't even really a nurse, and certainly never served in a hospital.
I think in the early days, and this was the early days of nursing, Florence Nightingale was trying to elevate the profession to be a self-contained, very respectable career. Mary Seacole came from a different tradition. She came from a holistic tradition which used whatever you could find, both inside yourself and around you, to make people better. This didn't fit in to the early parameters of the nursing profession.
At the time, there was nothing dishonourable about her going out there and offering hot dinners and comforts to the troops. But it's used, I think, really as a form of attacking her now, because people who are trying to denigrate her and say, well, she wasn't a proper trained nurse. Well, what women were proper trained nurses? There was no trained nursing system in place for women until Florence Nightingale set it up after the Crimean War.
And there is another aspect to this controversy. Many believe Mary Seacole has been used to help discredit the achievements of Florence Nightingale.
I think Florence Nightingale came under attack partly because she was white, partly because she was upper middle class, even because she was a woman. And Mary Seacole was a very easy replacement figure, very useful, because obviously nursing needs a black figurehead.
And the fact of the matter is, great heroines like Mary Seacole or Florence Nightingale all have bad days. Florence Nightingale has a reputation for being quite grumpy. I don't know whether that's true or not, but, you know, these people who become icons, they're not necessarily saints.
Mary Seacole may divide opinion today, but into her 70s she continued to be much loved by the military. When times were really hard, they came to her rescue again, and this time with lasting success.
In 1867, when money was running out for Mary Seacole, everybody sprang into action again to get this subscription fund going. And what they did to make it successful was to enlist the help of none other but Queen Victoria herself. She was at the top of the list, the money came racing in, and Mary was set for life.
At the age of 76, Mary died at her home in London. She was buried here, in Kensal Green. Once her army admirers had all passed away, there was no one left in Britain to keep her story alive. And for nearly 100 years, Mary Seacole's name was barely remembered. Then, in the 1970s, a new legion of fans discovered her.
She was compassionate. She had courage. She had commitment.
Many of the women here today not only helped put Mary back on the map, but also first raised the idea of a statue in her honor.
She had a heart for caring for people without question.
And now the statue is almost ready to be unveiled. For the last 3 years, I've been following the sculptor Martin Jennings as he went about creating the first statue in Britain of a well-known black woman, Mary Seacole. A businesswoman and doctoress, it was her courageous efforts during the Crimean War that brought her to prominence. Destined to stand opposite the Houses of Parliament, the bronze statue will be seen by visitors to London from the world over. And now, finally, the 3-meter-high clay model for the statue is finished.
The main thing was I wanted to get across her dynamism and her sheer energy. I've represented her as marching down to the battlefield with her bag of medications and the brandy that she'd take down to the wounded troops. And the energy that she displayed then, and in fact displayed throughout her life, is something that in a very simple way had to be communicated through this figure marching into the wind.
To get from clay to bronze, the statue has to undergo a number of intricate processes. These take several months. I've come down to the foundry to see one of the most exciting moments. Molten bronze is being poured into molds containing parts of the final statue.
Is this a very different part of the process for you, or you?
This is almost alchemical. This is alchemy for me. This is the bit where, after all those years of having your idea, modelling it inch by inch in the studio, going through all the moulding and casting processes before you pour the metal, when within a few moments the die is cast. You go from something that was an idea and has gone through a lot of processes to being the thing that will be there for decades, centuries afterwards. And it all happens in a moment.
When the metal has cooled, the molds are hacked open to reveal the bronze inside. Next door are some of the first sections of the statue to have passed through the casting process.
So you've not seen the bronze yet?
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, wow.
There it is. That's the most important bit.
I love the idea of looking across the Houses of Parliament. This is great.
With absolute confidence. But, you know, you can see all the marks of the clay modelling that are reproduced faithfully in the bronze.
Yes.
It's a very precise process.
And will you continue to work once this is put together?
We'll put all these pieces together, weld them together, and then work over the weld.
So you're happy?
I'll have a very close look at the whole thing, but it looks like a very good cast.
After 18 months of work, the memorial to Mary Seacole is nearing completion. With the end in sight, a date has been fixed for the unveiling. June the 30th, 2016. The figure and the disc that'll go behind it are being wrapped up and craned onto the lorry that'll take them to St. Thomas's Hospital in London for the unveiling ceremony. It's a great moment for her many admirers.
We as Black people, particularly the younger generation, are not aware of the fact that we've been part of British history for an incredibly long time. And it's really important to retell the story of Britain's history and reinsert Black figures into that history where they belong, because they really do belong in British history.
The memorial has cost the best part of £500,000. Together, the statue and the disc weigh 7.5 tons. It's been a monumental undertaking.
I don't think it's a matter of what she accomplished. I think it's what she represents. We have so many statues to prime ministers and kings and dignitaries and famous celebrities through history. How many actual representations do we have of a normal, honest, decent human being, full of compassion and care and love, who was a good Samaritan? And I think that Mary's statue represents that.
But while the unveiling is eagerly anticipated, the controversy has continued too.
It's important we celebrate women like Mary Seacole, and her life is intrinsically interesting. I object mainly to the idea that a statue to her should be erected on St Thomas's, the site associated with Florence Nightingale.
I think Mary was one of the most powerful people I've ever come across, but also one of the kindest. And that's a very strong combination, especially in medicine, and certainly deserves to be celebrated.
Finally, the day of the unveiling has arrived.
The person who's going to do the unveiling today, very well known, a strong voice in the House of Lords, Baroness Floella Benjamin.
There are several hundred people here, and it's an eclectic gathering of admirers, members of the military, celebrities, politicians, news crews, and of course, me.
It's fantastic to be about to see her finally revealed.
It's an extraordinary moment for a sculptor when his work is finally revealed. In the days leading up to the event, you've worried about every inch of it. But once it's unveiled, straight away, it's no longer yours alone. It becomes everybody's, and that's a wonderful moment.
So I stand before you, and I pay tribute, not just to Mary, but to my ancestors, and for generations to come. To Mary.
I think Mary Seacole merits a statue 100 years later because of her bravery, her commitment against the mores of the time.
Yes, it was an oversight, Mary Seacole, not having a statue, probably because she was a woman, and in that era, only royalty had statues. But it's an oversight, which I'm very glad is being rectified.
It is harder to put up statues of women. Only 15% of the statues in this country are of women. And even harder than that to put one up of a black woman. So there's a certain triumph to today, which I'm really glad to be celebrating.
Well, we should celebrate it. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much.
You know, it's taken us a very, very long time to acknowledge Mary Seacole in this way. And I think there's really something quite fantastic about the fact that she stands here overlooking the British seat of power, acting as a reminder of the contributions made to this country of people of colour, not just from the Commonwealth, but from the wider world.
And you know, for me personally, it's a really emotional moment. Finally, there's a statue of a woman whose skin colour was the same as my mum's, whom I can look up to. And I think Mary would have been absolutely thrilled by it too.